So let me tell you about growing up in Alabama. How many are from Alabama? Really? Where? That counts. Yeah, 15 years. So I'm from Alabama. I'm from the northwest corner of Alabama. I'm from that X right there. And this is an actual map of what's called the Dixie Alley, or a tornado alley. It's a really big tornado zone. My wife and I are from the white area of that. So the hottest fire is white, is that correct? Yeah, white hot. This is where we grew up. So I grew up in an environment where tornadoes were just like normal. They were absolutely part of your upbringing, and you got used to them. You could smell it. How many understand that? You can smell it. You can see the sky turning orange and weird colors in the distance. You could feel it. I remember being a little kid, and you're smarter than you think until they tell you you're not smart. You can sense this stuff as a child. And so tornadoes were just part of my life's culture. We had 3 TV channels on a VHF antenna that I would go outside and turn towards the city of the station. Anybody? So to get the weather reports, I would turn it towards Huntsville, channel 19. Dan Rather was Dan Satterfield was the meteorologist, and he told us if we were going to die or not. Anyone relate to this? Okay. Thank you, Dan. I just need to know tonight if I'm going to die. That was like how you lived your life. So the best part of this is most people had storm shelters, but those are expensive, and we were poor, so we had a ditch. And most people lived in a house, but we were poor, so we lived in a single-wide trailer. So I'm in the hot spot, single-wide trailer, and a ditch, and this is how I grew up. And I love it, by the way. I remember some very vivid memories about these tornadoes. My dad, if you ever get to meet him or be with him, he is unreasonably quiet and calm. And I have a memory of being outside with him with a tornado full on. My mom is so nervous her hair's falling out. And my dad is just, yeah, there's a storm. It explains a lot about me. Yeah. My kids are like, oh boy, this is how it happened. So my dad was super calm, my mom was not. But I remember my dad actually pausing me once, and we were just out in this, and we need to get inside. But inside of a trailer, what are you really getting inside of? And there was this moment where my dad, it kind of gets me. I almost cry thinking about this moment, because he paused me, and he said, look up. And there was this just interesting feeling as a child. I think I was my youngest age, maybe 8 or 9 or 10, something like that. And he knew it was dangerous, but he actually told me to look. And it was like it's such a moving, I think it's a part of me. That moment did something to me in my DNA. So from a very young age, there was something about my dad and realizing the odds of tornadoes were very unlikely. I remember getting a little older and hearing that the last tornado that had hit was in 1958. They started meteorological data in 1950. And so I always remembered thinking, we live in this weird little ditch, hole, like valley, but it's in a bowl. And I just remember thinking logically, I wasn't a weatherman, but I just went, a tornado would have to like come up and then dip. It's not going to happen, right? So I was working my kid math out, and I just never really feared that. So I have another memory where it's coming down. We have the weatherman on, seeing if we're going to die, and I walked outside in it by myself. And I didn't really notice what I was doing. I just thought it was so beautiful. And my mom, she's as nervous as 3 cats. And she screams at me through the screen door, which is ironic because we live in a trailer. Get inside. The whole thing's humorous to me. even at that point, it was humorous. But I was outside, and I would let the lightning flash so that it would show you the clouds. Have you ever done that, where you look at the lightning and it shows you the clouds? And I was just like wanting to see a funnel cloud. I wanted to see it because it's like, that's amazing. Like, I didn't know why. I was just really drawn to that. So, was this safe? No. Maybe not. Was it safe? A lot of you would go, you're insane. Was it wise? That's a question I could ask you. You all have an immediate opinion. And then, would I recommend it? And I would say no. I've had to wrangle this in a bit. My wife will tell you, Kansas has got some tornadoes, and I've had to learn to be more careful with my family and not be insane. So, are those things true? Is it safe? Is it unsafe to do what I did? Is it unwise? And you could say yes, but I want to challenge it a bit and say, but what if that's not the only answer? When it comes to fear and how we manage fear and think about fear and things we've been taught or told. So that's what I want to talk about tonight. I want to, if you're writing any notes down, I just would call this the fear of creativity. So here are 12 surprising things. Let me set this up though. So meteorology data started in 1950, and I told you the first tornado that hit Belgreen. It actually didn't even hit Belgreen, my town. It hit outside of it, but that was 1958. So that's 28,000 days. That's a 1 in 28,000 chance. That's a 0.00357% chance that a tornado would hit in the grand scheme of things over thinking in 1 year terms. So let me lay this out. Here are 12 things that are surprisingly more dangerous or statistically likely than being hit by that tornado. You're going to love it. Okay. And this is based off a 12-month span of time, which is actually favoring this even more because the tornado stat is based from 1958. Everybody catch me? All right? What you give your fear to controls you. Keep that in your mind. What you give your fear to controls you. Being struck by lightning is 294 times more likely than being hit by a tornado. Okay? Dying from a bee, wasp, or hornet sting is 75.6 times more likely. Being injured while mowing your lawn, 1,242 times more likely. I've been injured mowing my lawn. Have you? It's a what? You're pushing a sword, swinging on a. You know what I'm saying? It's a limb cutter. You're asking for. I used to mow my lawn in Crocs. That's a whole other issue. Dying in a car accident, 42,000 times more likely than being hit by a tornado. Note, you are approximately 804,000 times more likely to die in a car accident than an airplane crash. How many times do you get in a car? So just lay out the narrative here. Winning an Academy Award. We know Alice is close. Just from this today, just from what you've done today. 391 times more likely than being hit by a tornado. That's if you're an actor. Any actors? Okay, none. We need to work on that. Number 6, dying from a vending machine accident. 0.04. So this is slightly less likely, but I had to put it up because this is fun. Is that fun? That's not fun. Wrong choice of words. Being seriously injured by a champagne cork, 67 times. Being audited by the IRS, 20,455 times more likely. This is funny, but I want it to be funny because we should laugh a little bit about this. But think about what's in this humor, okay? Being killed by fireworks, 13 times more likely. Getting struck by a meteorite, 2.8 times more likely. My personal favorite, being injured by a toilet. Okay? What'd you say? There's a story, yes. 450 times more likely. Okay. So, tornadoes are real. I'm not discounting that. That would be stupid. They're very dangerous. But the way we fear them is it's disproportionate to the risk. I see the same irrational behavior in creative people. Completely irrational. I sense the same fear that leads to crippling creative lethargy in so many of my artist friends over the last, I'll say, 20 years. The risk is inflated to the point of ridiculousness. And that's what we're going to talk about. So, being very direct with you, fear is a thief. This is a soapbox. I'll go for the soapbox. Our whole lives, in this Western culture especially, and then in this newer internet age, newer news age, et cetera, and I'm not hating on stuff. I mean, it all has a place, but I'm gonna speak a really strong opinion here, and you float it or sink it, whatever you want to do with it. We have been programmed to fear risk and play it safe since we were born, most of us in this room. I was born in 82. If you look at technology through 82, there were books being written by people like Neil Postman as early as 1984 about the programming of TV and media in our psychology. So our entire lives, we have been programmed with fear. We have been sold fear our entire lives. Why have we been sold fear? Because fear sells. Fear gets you money if you're a business that offers a solution to fear. Fear gets attention. It gets you likes and subscribers. That's a metaphor. It does actually do that. But it gets you an attentive viewer, and you feed on their fear, and you control with that fear. And just to be clear, I'm not like painting some, Illuminati fear triangle thing. I'm not trying to fabricate that there's some old guy with his minions and they're, whatever. I'm just saying the world has fallen into a path that most of it actually operates with an attentiveness as corporations, media. Fear is a tool to get your eyes on them. That is just a fact. As a person in marketing, as a business guy, I see that. So, and I think you all know that. We're not, this isn't a revelation. So, it numbs us down and keeps us from being who we are. So, as creative artists, we often inflate the risks. What if I fail? How many have said, what if I fail? All of you are lying. Okay, I've definitely said it. What if what I'm doing is not good enough? And then we become paralyzed into the worst thing at all. And here's the worst thing at all. Not making what you're supposed to make. That's the worst thing for you. I think everyone in this room, there's a lot of worsts. Here's a worst. Just for you, if you're here, you make stuff, right? Is that a fair, or you were drugged here by some crazy person who makes stuff? The worst thing for everyone in this room, under the context of tonight and why you're here, you're motivated to go beyond where you're at or to find community or something. The worst thing you could possibly do is not do, okay? So, the danger of not creating is far greater than any of your fears about creating. Like, just sit on that for a second. The danger of not making what you're supposed to make is far greater than any of your fears about making that thing. Okay, art is needed. It's essential to life. We're called to make stuff. There's so many things I could say here, and so many things that you've heard. And I want to say this as well, because this is I literally do this once, twice a year to a group of believers like me, people who follow Jesus. I'll say this to you specifically. I challenge you to biblically defend the fear of not making. I would just ask you to do that on your own. Try and reconcile the worry you have. Try to reconcile the fear that society has on you about failing as a creative. Just attempt to prove it with Scripture, and you will not be able to. But I challenge you to do it, because it's healthy to do it, because you're all believers in here, and I'll get into that a bit later. Really, really try to find that and let that get you somewhere that you're not noticing. Okay, so now that we have this little opening of it's statistically not solid to worry about certain things, right? Tornadoes are dangerous. Failing stuff could cost you money. There's some parallels. Failure can be expensive, but it's not what it's cut out to be. It's not what you've held on to. How many in here have absolutely failed at a creative endeavor and lost something? I have definitely. I've lost hundreds of thousands of dollars on ideas. I could show you. I thought about showing some of those. I have lost. I have a project I lost $175,000 on, and it worked itself out after I cried in a corner. So now that we talk about that reality, I'm not discounting the tornado. Let's move to an example I want to show you. So, anybody here like jazz? Wow, that's a shocker. I thought I was going to have to beg people to like jazz. I was telling someone in the back, jazz is like sushi. You're like, you like sushi? And everybody's like, no. And you're like, have you tried it? So jazz has that thing where once you get into it, you might like it. So let's check this out. This is Charlie Parker. Anyone know who Charlie Parker is? They actually released a really cool Kansas City recording of him. They released a record last year. So Charlie Parker is the high priest of bebop was his name. Bebop was a genre that came out of the turn of the century where basically how we think of jazz, a lot of you will think of jazz as like, the swinging groove and the horns and the saxophones. This was the very early versions of this genre that came out of big band. It was where big band was kind of formed some of the big band stuff, but it's a very orchestrated, frantic style of music that was very popular. You went to see this stuff. There weren't a lot of people, you couldn't go to YouTube or Spotify. This is an era of music where if you want to see music, you go see it. If you want to hear music, you want to go see it. The music industry is really young. It's technically from 1930 on. If you think about that, it's pretty wild. So this is a very primitive thing, about 20 years into music being an industry. And let me let you hear Charlie Parker. Notice he's really busy. There's a lot going on. Buddy Rich is on the drums, one of the greatest drummers who's ever lived. But it is a lot. It's like putting your face in a fireplace. I can't dance. I don't think you can dance to this. So this is a pretty rare, that's a rare television recording where you kind of get to see some footage there. So, live music, they're together, well rehearsed, that's bebop. Then a guy named Miles Davis comes along. So you have these moments in musicology and music history. You have this stuff, Stu shared this personal thing. I loved what he was saying about, he heard Queen and wanted to be Brian May. And then he heard Radiohead, The Bends, and I have all those moments too. This happens with music. Music is a living organism, and genres, if music is a tree, genres are the branches, and they always touch something. You don't just have rock and roll. You don't just have Elvis. You have the stuff before Elvis, etc. So Miles Davis is building his hero. So Stu's hero was Brian May. Miles Davis's hero, and John Coltrane, who you'll see, the hero you just saw. Okay, so Charlie Parker was the hero. So then came Miles Davis. Let's listen to this for a second. This is from 1959, 4 years later. This is when you think, there's always that scene in the detective movie where it's like, hey, Babs, let's go over there and solve some crime. You know that scene? There's a murderer on the loose. Okay. That didn't exist till that video. 4 years, and you have a new form of jazz. What really differentiates this form of jazz is that this entire record, I'm about to show you how the record happened. Miles Davis decided to gather some musicians. They go into an old church turned into a studio in New York, and they are going to track a record. And Miles Davis is being really inspired by this African finger piano thing, and he's really creative. Like, he's the artist you're kind of embarrassed to tell your friends about that you know. You know, like if your buddies, you're like, yeah, there's Miles, don't look at his painting. Like that, Miles he's out there, but people really are drawn to him. And this record's a big deal. He goes into the studio, he brings in these amazing musicians, and he gives them autonomy and space. I love Stu that said this as well, space in music. The Charlie Parker had no space, right? So Miles is playing with space. He's playing with the unknown. That's the point. That's why I'm going to show you this clip. They go in and record for this record, and the first track that they record is called So What. You should go listen to this record. If you don't like it, listen to it. You'll like it eventually. It's such an important record. So What starts with this bass line, and you're going to hear the bass line. It's an upright, and you're going to hear you're going to hear on the ride just tapping a rhythm. And they were going to hang in that forever, but they were going to barely improvise over it. And then a mistake happens about 90 seconds in. I've trimmed this, so we'll go right into it. So I want you to listen really close. The drummer throws his brushes down, Billy Cobb. He picks up a drumstick, and for no reason other than he must have had low blood sugar, he bashes the cymbal. And everyone, there's some amazing writing on this. They all look to Miles, and he's like my dad. There's a parallel. He goes, and he just picks his horn up and rides it. And the band is panicked. And then the bass player pushes into the mistake. The drummer pushes into the mistake. So let's listen to it. I hear people humming the melody. This is recorded to tape, so you don't make mistakes. That's another pressure here. They don't get to overdub. They're in a room together. There's a lot of money on the line in a mistake. So this is going to ride out this way. Just a few more seconds and you'll hear it. And then they keep going, and you think they planned this, but the entire band says they thought they were all going to get fired. But Miles just stands there like my dad in the storm, picks his trumpet up, and this is one of the greatest horn parts in modern music. It's studied by colleges, universities. This is the epitome of what jazz is now. So this record was, you know, it's always top 100. Apple Music put it at 25. So just for reference, this is a highly ranked moment in music history. Hendrix' Are You Experienced first record is like way behind this. Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. I put Alanis for all the angry teenage girls. That's one of the best-selling albums of all time, and this record is ranked much higher. Joshua Tree by U2 is not even close to this. Kid A, one of the most transformative modern records ever made by Radiohead. Led Zeppelin 2. That album, because that was the first track, they committed to the unknown, and Miles Davis committed to risk. He decided to make a record and not know what they were going to make. And this was crazy. Unheard of. Major label, formative moment in the world of music. So, he teaches us, there's a lesson here. Miles teaches us that risk is where creativity actually lives. Okay, risk is where it lives. Safety is not where it lives. Can you make safe art? Yeah, absolutely. Can people enjoy it? Absolutely. But if you want to change a community, if you want to change a section of your world. If you want to do what God created art to do, you risk. If we do what has already been done, we're doing what's already been done, and what's already been done has a result. Risk is doing what has not been done and will cause a different result. This is a basic logic problem here. So risk is where creativity lives. A moment of pause for you. When is the last time you took a risk? Just think about that for a second. When is the last time you took a risk? All right. So, how do we do the risk? So here's a practical. I usually forget practicals. Let's do a practical. I always hear Alice, like, explain the practical. So this is a good thank you. I'm learning. Here is a way that I love to explore this, and I've been learning more about it. I've naturally done this, but I'm trying to learn about it, and it's really wonderful. So it's a magic trick. I learned it from Alice. Thank you. Everyone just applaud. I love it. No, it's because it's in her wheelhouse. I'll explain. It's called the art of improv. Anyone love comedy improv? So improv is a rule. It has a set of rules. It is itself a method of creativity. But comedy improv is great. There's an Amy Poehler masterclass you should go watch. I watched it the other night. And it's just a wonderful framework for making stuff. You always think about whose line is it anyway or something. It's way more than that. Those are brilliant. It affects your life if you actually adopt the rules. So rule number 1 is all we're going to care about. It's a big rule. You're going to want to write it down. Yes, and. All right, if you're an improv person, this is Genesis 1:1, right? This is it. This is John 3:16. Yes, and. If you don't do this, nothing happens. So it's a skill you can learn, and that's what I'm challenging you right now. This is something I'm doing this. I want you to take this home and think about it in your creative work. So it starts with letting go of having things all planned out. That's the creator, artist problem number 1 on a list of 1,000. Having things all planned out. Who loves having it planned out? It's great. We're all made differently, and you're very talented at something that causes you, there's a reason you're like that. God made you that way. In creativity, though, having it all planned out, it's going to really hurt you in most cases. It just will. So moving from that, it's when we stop trying to control the tornado, the narrative, and just enjoy it and see what happens. This is really challenging for people. Sit back and just try to let it happen is horrifying in a lot of ways. It's vulnerable. It's like standing naked on the stage. It is. Ask any one of your creative friends. Putting your work out there and just going with the flow and not having a plan, it is so vulnerable and so scary. So yes and is the idea, we say yes to the idea, the moment, and we take that opportunity instead of shutting it down out of fear. So that's what yes and is about. Here's a clip of Tina Fey explaining it. I didn't want to use the masterclass thing so I didn't get sued. So I found this on YouTube. This is Tina Fey. She was a master improver. It kind of explains it quickly here.
It has a lot of lessons in it. So for example, stop, I've got a gun.
The gun I gave you for our wedding anniversary, Eric, how could you?
We're not married.
Aha. We're not married is a denial. We've learned our first improv lesson. It takes a long time.
Let me start this one more time. Let me set it up. She's at Google, and he wants to do improv with her. So the very first line is he's telling her, and with improv, you have to keep saying yes. You have to keep adding on to what's being said. The moment you say no or put up a wall, it dies. So watch this again.
It has a lot of lessons in it. So for example, stop. I've got a gun.
The gun I gave you for our wedding anniversary, Eric, how could you?
We're not married.
Aha. we're not married is a denial. We've learned our first improv lesson. It takes a long time to learn those basic rules of improv.
So why don't you take us through them? And they're in the book.
Sure, they're in the book. Improv having really kind of changed my professional life and even sort of my worldview a little bit. There are some basic rules of improvisation. When you're creating something out of nothing, the first rule is to agree, which is to say yes, which we did do that successfully. You said, freeze, I have a gun, and I didn't say, that's not a gun, that's your finger. I said,
which is what a Google person would say.
yeah, well, no, I don't know.
Okay.
So we agreed, and the next rule is yes and, which is to add on to what you've already agreed upon. So the gun I gave you for our wedding anniversary, how could you? And then we hit a brick wall. There's an old story about Joan Rivers in 1959, 1960, and they used this in class at Second City all the time, that there was someone came in and said, I want a divorce, was the beginning of the scene. She said, I want a divorce, and whoever was with her on stage said, but what about the children? And she said, we don't have any children, which in the moment got a big laugh, but killed the scene.
So she's explaining, and this is for the creative, whether you paint, whether you write music, whatever, she's saying things are being thrown at you with what you do. Stop saying no. The weatherman is on telling you you're going to die. What are you going to do? Creatively, we all live in a trailer. What are you going to do? You have a choice. Do you understand? Stuff is constantly coming at you. You have stuff constantly pushing that fear button, that button that says, this is not in my plan, I'm sweating, this is not what they said it would be like, this is not what college taught me, this is not what they said writing a book would be like, this is not what they said this would look like. My paint isn't mixing properly, I hate my life. This is not it. This is not, Adobe is horrible, I can't edit, I can't get my movie done. There are so many ways to shut down the yes, and you are doing it. The choice has to be creatively, yes and. Yes and. I did not expect you to say you had a gun. Yes and. I did not expect you. You guys understand this? It's on you. It is not on the problems. It is not on the circumstances. If you live a life creatively, shutting yourself down because of circumstances, you will never make anything. The truth is, and I talked about this last year, the circumstances create the art if you say yes. We make things from the tornado, not against it. We make things from the pain, from the hardness of it. We make things in our communities from the problems of the communities. We don't stop and go, no, 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 no. To move forward creatively, you have to keep saying yes. And for some of you, that's incredibly uncomfortable, but I want to tell you that's it. That's the only way to do it. Or you'll be 80 years old, you'll never have made anything, and that impact that was yours was never seen. That's the risk. The greatest risk is not the risk. So what if your book sucks? You wrote a book. So what if it doesn't sound good when you strum the guitar? Figure it out later. You don't get to the thing without getting to the thing. So what if your painting looks like a turd? You gotta figure it out. And the main stop for almost everyone I've seen is you just don't think you're ready. And you shut down the improv. Miles Davis, Bob Dylan, Robin Williams, Jackson Pollock, even people like Steve Jobs, they said yes constantly. And because they did that, the world is different. So, closing up here, what about you? Are you saying no to your ideas because of this yes-no conundrum? Because you need to get it figured out. Because you need to mitigate risk. Are you doing that? This is an honest point. just to set in for 5 seconds. What are you not saying yes to? What's your excuse? Because you want to make sure it'll work. That's a funny one. I'm not going to do this till I make sure it works. How does that work? Because you can't do the thing and know. Do you understand? You have to do a thing to even know if it works. So if you don't start the thing because you're worried it won't work, you'll never do the thing. It's like a skit. It's like a comedy skit. So here's a pro tip. You will never figure it out. You will never be sure. Just start. Art is the opportunity to try something that might not work. Opportunity is key. Art is, it's not the challenge, it's not the risk, it's the opportunity for you. Because if you're here, you're probably not happy unless you're making stuff. That's why we're all weird and we're gathered here today. So I'm telling you, it's opportunity. The risk is the opportunity. So, again, back to the point of Christ, putting some Jesus in this, which I love to be able to do in this setting. Do you really believe what you believe? Let's pull your faith in for 1 second. Here are the things you have said. This is what Lifeway puts on t-shirts. This is what your mom had crocheted on the toilet. Here's some sayings. He leads me. He guides my steps. He is a lamp unto my feet. The presence of fear in your creativity is the evidence that you don't actually believe that. The presence of fear, and we all do this. I struggle with this too. The presence of fear in any creative act is the evidence that you actually don't believe that God's involved. God being involved is a wrecking ball to your plan. You signed up for this, if you signed up for it. And maybe there's some people here that don't follow Jesus, and that's awesome. Glad you're here. But if you signed up for that particular version of this package, you have a lot to figure out in the sense of you actually don't believe those texts. You actually don't believe those scriptures, and you don't believe that about God. Because if he leads and guides you, if he ordains your steps, if he's a lamp unto your feet, the worst that could happen is you don't do what you wanted to do and you end up on the path he has made for you. That is a horrible thing. God bless you. I'm so sorry for you. Just talking it out here. So, in closing, this is just the 5 points I would just say to break down. Fear is a thief. The risk of not creating is greater than the risk of failure. Say yes and. Everything great began as someone else's risk. It's a point I didn't get to, but you can understand that. Everything you love was someone else saying yes. Chew on that one. Stop stalling and start creating.